Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 1993's Kirby's Adventure, the second outing for Nintendo's famous puffball, which introduced his most famous ability, the ability to take other people's abilities.
Following that is the explorative first-person adventure of unraveling what happened to a town that encountered a pattern of light, with a critically acclaimed soundtrack to back it up. 2015's Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I tried to look for a theme and noticed, this is probably the first time that both of the games we're talking about this week have apostrophe S in their title. Granted, it's not exactly the same use because it's kind of the possessive of KIRBY'S.
He owns the adventure.
But then it's, everybody has gone to the Rapture, so everybody's, so it's kind of just the contraction there. Not exactly the same use, but apostrophe S. That's a weird one. Also, Kirby just acts as a divine being upon the lowly masses, and an act upon the lowly masses is kind of what the Rapture is. So Kirby is the cause of the Rapture. There you go.
I mean, if you think about it, he can instantly dissolve any creature into stardust. That's basically being Rapture.
It's a terrifying being, that Kirby. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I am doing pretty all right, as I'm sure you will say as well. Moving very, very slowly and surely, but also still very stressfully. The cat can tell that something is wrong, but he cannot figure out what.
We have bought almost 20 plastic moving bins. So, yeah, right there with you. They're just sitting in our living room.
We have a ton of boxes. So, like, all of my small knickknacks and my amiibos and all that, those are the first thing to get packed because those are the easiest thing to pack. And so there were just a bunch of boxes out in the living room full of stuff, and he's just looking at them like, I don't understand. Where'd everything go? What's happening? And you can tell that he knows something's wrong. You can tell. But when I'm not packing all my things to move, my bedtime game recently has become Final Fantasy VIII, which I can tell I wouldn't like if I didn't have the cheat function. Because it has one of the most pointlessly complex systems of magic and stat increases, and it's really dumb to a point where I cannot understand where the hell they came up with it. It's sure a thing, but, I named Squall Leon because the Heartless have not yet been vanquished, and that's the important part.
Triple Triad. That's all I really know about Final Fantasy VIII.
I haven't tried Triple Triad yet. I'm afraid.
I've only pretty much been playing Mario Kart. Some new Mario Kart content. We'll talk about that in a bit. That's honestly all I've had time for because I'm also traveling for work on top of all this moving. It's just very stressful, all things considered. It's a miracle that we're still putting out episodes, honestly.
I think basically what you're saying is be ready for some solo episodes in the next couple weeks.
If I had to guess, yeah. All right, let's talk about some composer follow-up news. We like to highlight different composers on this show, of course. And we also like to keep tabs on what they're doing, new projects announced, if it's tied into big headlines in the game industry. Let's talk about that Mario Kart 8 Booster Course Pack, the first installment of which is out now. And it features Coconut Mall from Mario Kart Wii, one of the tracks we talked about in that episode. So I think it's one of the best racetracks in the Mario Kart Wii game, one of the best songs, and you know what? It's great to have it here. Would also like to hear Toad's Factory in that booster course pack, though.
Give me Waluigi Pinball! I haven't played any of the new tracks yet. I've heard the tour tracks are like really, really well done.
Mm-hmm.
I've especially heard great things about the Paris track. So I'm looking forward to giving that a shot. Meanwhile, Humble Games, the publisher that also runs like the Humble Bundle stuff, they had a showcase and announced a bunch of games. The ones that are relevant to people we've talked about in the past, you have Monaco 2, the sequel to Monaco What's Yours Is Mine. The original game was composed by Austin Wintory, and it seems to still be him. At least he retweeted the announcement. So I'm taking that as it's probably him. You have Stray Gods, which is also a game being worked on by Austin Wintory. I believe we've talked about this before.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
There was a Kickstarter, and we had talked about it at some point, maybe when we did Austin Wintory for a focus of an episode, but it finally has a title, and Montaigne is also working on it. She is a Australian artist, I believe. She was in Eurovision. I know her because she did the new theme song for My Brother and Me, and she seems like a fun lady, so I'm looking forward to that. And then you have Infinite Guitars, which is a rhythm RPG featuring music by Too Mellow, but I don't believe he is the sole composer for that game.
Stray Gods is definitely an interesting one. It's an RPG musical. Mm-hmm. I want to see how they bring that one up. Because, I remember talking about it on the show as like, how are they going to make this work? It's in Kickstarter. So, we will see. ID at Xbox also had a couple of new game announcements. One of them is Immortality, an interactive movie trilogy. And this is from Sam Barlow, who is the creator behind Her Story. He did the music for that game. I would imagine that he would also take his stab at that as well. It seems to be coming out in summer 2022, so keep your eye on that one if you liked Her Story and Telling Lies. And also Escape Academy, which has music from Dose 1.
Yeah, I'm especially looking forward to Escape Academy because it looks really neat, but I still got to play Telling Lies.
Oh, same, yeah.
And I'm looking forward to seeing what more Sam Barlow does with it. But yeah, Telling Lies is still on my short list of things that I need to play soon. In other news, Microsoft's Game Pass that still somehow makes money, and I don't know how. Last week, I mentioned how it was kind of surprising that Paradise Killer wasn't on Game Pass. And then literally the day after that episode came out, Paradise Killer is now on Game Pass. I don't understand where this magic is coming from, but hey, now you can play Paradise Killer. Hollow Knight is also now on Game Pass, so if you want to play probably one of the best Metroidvanias in a really, really long time, hey, there's your chance. Play it. It's good.
Game Pass is so good. I am scared for when it becomes more expensive.
And it will one day.
You gotta make up big acquisitions with Activision Blizzard and Bethesda somehow. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. All right, let's jump into the video games that we are talking about. We're going to start with an olden video game. It's Kirby's Adventure. Released for the Famicom/NES on March 23rd, 1993 in Japan. North America would get it on May 1st, 1993, with the PAL regions receiving it September 12th, 1993. It would come out on the Wii Virtual Console in 2007, 3DS in November 2011, which I believe it also got a 3D Classics sort of version as well, Wii U in April 2013, and then was also released as a part of the Kirby's Dream Collection for the Wii. I believe it was like Kirby's Adventure Superstar, and I know 64 was on there as well, but I don't remember what else was on that collection.
It was the 20th anniversary celebration game, yeah.
Yeah. And it is currently playable on both the NES Classic or the Nintendo Switch Online NES app. It was, of course, developed by HAL Laboratory and published by Nintendo. You all know Kirby, draw a circle, then you dot the I's, you draw a big smile, and bam, Kirby.
Unless you're a programmer.
Yeah. So, he's the puffball. Everybody knows Kirby. This is actually the second game in the Kirby franchise, following the Game Boy title Kirby's Dream Land, but to be perfectly honest, this might as well be the first Kirby game, and we'll talk about why in a second. We have actually talked about 2 Kirby games before, which I'm kind of surprised only 2, being Kirby's Epic Yarn back in episode 6, and then Kirby 64 in episode 24, so it has been over 100 episodes since we last talked about Kirby.
Superstar's a big blind spot, but I think that's a case of literally trying to find another musician to talk about.
Probably, I believe. So, Kirby's Adventure is overall usual 2D platformer. You got 2 differences though. So Kirby has near unlimited jumps. He can puff himself full of air, but if he gets hit, he's gonna fall like a brick. But while he's flying, he can also breathe out a puff of air that will hurt enemies if they hit it. He also has the ability to inhale an enemy and gain a copy ability from it, which is one of Kirby's most famous abilities, and this is the game that introduced it. This might as well be the first Kirby game.
I didn't know that. I would always thought of Dreamland as the first, and then you have Nightmare in Dreamland, and I just haven't played enough Kirby games. I would have never thought this was the game that brought that ability.
So, fun fact, Nightmare in Dreamland is a remake of this game.
What?
Not of Kirby's Dreamland.
Oh my god. Oh, okay, all right.
I know, it's confusing. But in the original Kirby's Dreamland on the Game Boy, he was able to breathe in enemies, but he did not get powers from doing so.
Okay.
For instance, if anybody has not seen Kirby do literally anything for the past 20 years, if you inhale an enemy with a sword, Kirby can now use a sword. 1 copy ability can be had at a time, and apparently this also introduced the ability to run and Kirby's slide kick.
I'm going back through the Nightmare in Dreamland catchy jingle that was made famous on the commercials, and the lyric, eating up the bad guys and taking away their powers, should have probably tipped me off to that fact. I'm just beating myself up for that over here.
I mean, to be fair, the game is called Nightmare in Dreamland, not Adventure in Dreamland, which probably would have worked a little bit better, but
And Nightmare's the villain? Ah!
Yeah. Oh, did you not know that either? So the story of Kirby's Adventure is very simple. See, Dreamland is provided with restful sleep and good dreams by the magical Fountain of Dreams. But one day, the evil King Dedede steals the fountain's power source, the Star Rod. Did you know the Star Rod in Smash is from this game? Dedede splits it into pieces, giving the fountain's power source to his various minions, and Kirby, hoping to restore the fountain to help his friends get their good sleep, takes off on a journey throughout Dreamland to retrieve the Star Rod and return the Fountain of Dreams to working order. But why would Dedede even steal the Star Rod in the first place? And Peter, this is where I will ask, what are your experiences with Kirby's Adventure?
Clearly, I don't know anything about it. Clearly. But knowing that this game is on Switch Online, it's pretty tempting to want to go check it out. And, from what I've heard of the soundtrack that you've picked out here, that's a good soundtrack.
It is a very, very good soundtrack. We played it for Smasterpiece as it was, I think, Kirby's game. I'm pretty sure Kirby's game. Boy, this game can barely run on an NES. It is dying most of the time, which isn't really a problem because, to be honest, Kirby's Adventure is a really easy game. It's a Kirby game. They can get hard. I don't think Kirby's Adventure ever really does. And it's still fun. It's just be ready for a lack of frame rate for most of it. That being said, I love Kirby's Adventure. It's probably the Kirby game I've played the most, even above Kirby 64, simply because Nintendo has made this game available in so many different ways, like a million times. And it's short. You can beat it in like 2-3 hours if you know what you're doing. So I've played through it a ton. One of the only good NES games. If you're taking notes, there are 2 of those, the other one being Mega Man 2. There we go. That should sufficiently get everybody angry at me, right? All right. Let's talk about how it came to be, though, because this is a very, very formative game for a lot of things. According to director Masahiro Sakurai, a name we know very well from his time and work on the Super Smash Bros. Series, the project that became Kirby's Adventure was initially built on a request from Nintendo to simply port Kirby's Dream Land from the Game Boy onto the NES. But Sakurai felt that this wouldn't really fit on the console because the Game Boy game, Dreamland, had kind of been designed with beginners in mind because, you're using a handheld game, has to be short, and probably mostly kids playing it. But the NES, though, that's where a lot of like the hardcore audience lived. And so he figured like, we can't just put this game there wholesale. People will yell at us because it's too easy. So they made the decision to create a new game so thoroughly that they decided to not even reuse any of Dreamland's assets to assist in development. Everything in this game is brand new. Copy abilities, specifically, were the result of Sakurai wanting to keep Dreamland's simplistic gameplay while also sort of opening room for more advanced players to still do wacky stuff and have fun. And the team had apparently designed over 40 copy abilities before they ended up picking and choosing their favorites for actual inclusion in the game. The final number is 24 of them, being Backdrop, Ball, Beam, Burning, Crash, Cutter, Fire, Freeze, Hammer, High Jump, Ice, Laser, Light, Mic, Needle, Parasol, Sleep, Spark, Stone, Sword, Throw, Tornado, UFO, and Wheel. What's the difference between burn and fire? Anyways, Adventure also added some substantial things to Kirby's character design, such as making him a little bit bigger, as one of the criticisms for the Game Boy game was that Kirby was a little too small. But this is also the game that made it canon that Kirby is pink, because the Game Boy was a monochromatic system. And on the cover of the Game Boy game, it's also gray. Famously, Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario and Donkey Kong and all that, he wanted Kirby to be yellow, but Sakurai was in charge of this game, and he wanted Kirby to be pink. And so Kirby is pink. Allegedly, members of the dev team were shocked to learn that Kirby was pink, according to Sakurai, which, to be a fly on the wall and figure out what the hell that means, I wish. Oh, that would be amazing. So by the time this game had entered development, the NES was almost a decade old. Hell, the SNES was out by the time this game entered development.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
And therefore, programmers believed that they had a firm grasp on how to get the most out of the hardware that they could. That's what they say. Personally, having played Kirby's Adventure and seen how it can barely function sometimes, I disagree with them. But who am I to judge? So, back in that day, one of the more interesting things that I read, backgrounds in games were mostly put together by the game mapping and level design specialists on the team. But in Adventure, they decided that they were going to have artists design the backgrounds, and then those artists would hand the work over to the team's mapper. And apparently, according to assistant director Takashi Saito, their goal with that was to make it so that if there was no game in front of them, you'd still have a pleasant time looking at the backgrounds of the level. And it really shows, actually, because this game does some really neat stuff visually with its backgrounds. I do think it is 100% perfect. Did you know that Kirby's Adventure is also the first game to feature Meta Knight? He was apparently unnamed in this game, but it's a really cool boss fight. He's a late game boss fight where you walk in and he jumps into the room and throws a sword into the ground, and Kirby goes to pick it up, and now you got a duel. It's awesome. Kirby's Adventure reviewed very well upon release. Game Rankings back in the day gave it a score of 84%. Even retrospective reviews actually give a lot of love to Kirby's Adventure. Many players consider it to be among the best games in the NES's library. I think I agree with that. I like Kirby's Adventure despite its problems. It's just a fun, neat game, and it visually does these interesting things. Despite being released at the tail end of the NES's long life cycle. Like I said, the NES had been out for like a decade by this point, and the Super Nintendo had also been out for a couple years. People had moved on from these 8-bit platforms onto the future of 16-bit. Even then, Kirby was at the top of Famitsu's sales charts in Japan the month of its release. It was the highest selling game in March of 1993 in Japan. That says something, I feel like. Honestly, Kirby's Adventure has had more of an impact on the Kirby franchise than pretty much any other game in the series, and even outside of Kirby, Copy has become one of Kirby's most iconic abilities. Most people know it from Super Smash Bros., where an insane amount of work is put into Kirby being able to inhale and copy every single character in every single entry in the series, including, like, you can breathe in Solid Snake and now you have a grenade. You can breathe in Joker and now Kirby has a gun. It's great. It's great. Also, copy abilities from Kirby's Adventure make up pretty much all of Kirby's special moves. His down special is Stone. His side special is Hammer. He's got Cutter for his up special. You can also get, like, I believe his old dash attack was Burning, which is the, like, he turns into a fireball and moves forward. It was a bad dash attack, but that's where that's from as well. Meta Knight became a playable character in Brawl and has been featured in every entry since. I mean, so did King Dedede, but Dedede was introduced in Dreamland, so he doesn't get to be celebrated here. Kirby's Adventure received a full remake for the GBA, as we talked about earlier, being Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. It features brand new art and a bunch of new content, from new minigames to new gameplay modes, and there's even one gameplay mode that lets you play as Meta Knight. I believe that is largely considered to be the definitive version, but it also has, like, some weird decisions and things that have been left off about it. But, you know, if you have access to GBA games, there's that one too.
He's a man of many, many faces. He may be
Nightmare
pink.
in Dreamland.
Joe, why are we talking about Kirby finally today?
Because a new Kirby game is coming out this week on Friday, being Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which is Kirby's first actually 3D game. Kirby 64 is technically 3D, but not really, because you're still walking along sort of a rail path. But I don't know if I'm going to play Forgotten Land at launch, mostly because money. But it looks good, and it sounds like it's going to be good, and I'm looking forward to giving it a shot at some point.
Mouthful mode gets you a whole bunch of copy abilities. Just brand new possibilities.
Oh, the less I think about mouthful mode, the better. It's horrifying. Let's talk about our composer for this week, and it has been a very long time. I cannot believe it's taken 165 episodes to get to Hirokazu Ando. And unfortunately, that build-up of 165 episodes doesn't really pay off, because there's nothing about this man on the internet. He was born in 1969, no exact date. He joined HAL in 1991, and he is still there. So that's cool. He's done so many Kirby games. His music and sound design can be heard in Adventure, Dream Course, Dreamland 2, Star Stacker, 64, Nightmare in Dreamland, Air Ride, Squeak Squad, Superstar Ultra, Epic Yarn, Return to Dreamland, Triple Deluxe, Planet Robobot, Star Allies, Super Kirby Clash, and most recently Kirby Fighters 2. But he is even more well-known among video game music folks like you and me because he was the main composer for Super Smash Bros. And Super Smash Bros. Melee.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Melee is probably the one he's most well-known for because the remixes in 64 are just sort of, they're there. They exist. They're good. But Melee takes it to a whole nother level. He also apparently did music for Picross 3D and Picross 3D Round 2, as well as Box Boy, Box Boy, and Bye Bye Box Boy. There are way more Box Boy games than I thought there were.
Yeah. Enough to make a trilogy that... Has that hit Switch yet?
I think there's one Box Boy game on Switch. Box Boy and Box Girl.
Oh, yeah.
On Switch.
Okay.
Every time I blink, I feel like a new Box Boy game drops somewhere.
Yeah, but I feel like there was like a trilogy on 3DS there, so more things to eventually come over to Switch.
Mm-hmm. In terms of historical development research, this soundtrack was not only composed by Hirokazu Ando, but also has tracks by Jun Ishikawa, who we have talked about. We talked about him for his work on Kirby 64 way back in the day. Though, as far as I can tell, there does not seem like there has ever been an official soundtrack release. I could not find any way to tell who composed what. And even if I went in and looked at the songs in Smash, the arranger is always marked down as HAL Laboratory, not a specific name. So, unfortunate, but, 1993 was a different time, I guess.
Yeah, so for the video version of the clips, we'll just have both there and hope for the best.
So, let's get started, shall we? We're going to start with critical track number 1. It's Title Theme. First you draw a circle, then you dot the eyes. Draw a great big smile. He's the shape of a friend. This is the song that plays over that. It's also the song that plays over the main menu. It's just so bouncy. I love it so much. This is one of the main places where it feels like you can hear these people have been spending a decade with this hardware and they know how to get the most out of it. The music is where that shines the most, I feel like, because even just this song, it's so much more full than I'm used to NES music being. And it's fun, it's bouncy, it's cute.
Oh no, so when I drew it, I just did a big side profile inhaling mouth that looks like an eldritch horror. Oh, okay, interesting.
I mean, Kirby is an eldritch horror, he's just shaped like a friend.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, hearing this is definitely eye-opening, and it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about a 1993 NES game that, they know how to pump out the music for this, and I think the percussion here, or at least the sense of a beaten rhythm, is just especially good here.
Yeah, but we gotta get to some real good stuff. That's being the stage themes, because those are the most important parts of any Kirby game. The first one, before we get to the two most iconic ones, obviously, is Ice Cream Island 2. As this game never got an official soundtrack release, these tracks are just sort of titled what we want. Fans have also called this song High Hills. This is one of the first areas that you go to in the game. All of the areas in Kirby are named after food. All of them. It's great. But, I don't know, something about this song always brings me straight back to Kirby's Adventure. It feels so Kirby. It's overly cheerful and just this really driving pace. I really, really like this song a lot.
There are a lot of Kirby themes that have stood the test of time, and we'll get to them surely. But there's something about this one with a dun da dum dun da dum dun da dun dun dun. Like it's that's just I couldn't tell you where exactly how it's titled because I feel like that's not one that has been used, repeatedly in Smash or something like that, or I'm sure it's been used in other Kirby games, but there's something about that melody that is just, that's Kirby.
I don't remember this song off the top of my head ever because, again, there are other songs from this game that have been used a ton in other stuff, including Kirby games, Smash, you name it. But whenever I hear this song, it's like, oh, right, I remember this song. This is one of my favorite songs in the game. It's quintessentially Kirby. And speaking of quintessentially Kirby, let's get into the first of two of the most iconic video game themes ever. The first one being butter building. This is actually the second time butter building has come up on this show. We talked about a version of it from Kirby 64 way, way back, which I still think is the best version of butter building. But this is where the song originates. And it's one of the most iconic Kirby themes ever. There are only two above it, in my opinion, and one of them doesn't show up in this game. Being Gourmet Race, which is obviously the number one, but that's not in this game. So that's
Superstar for sure. But I still think this is my favorite Kirby theme. And it's nice to hear kind of its roots here because, man, this track got some incredible remixes in Kirby 64, in Brawl. That's an incredible version of butter building. Really, really like this one. I think this is my favorite from the game.
Yeah, this is one of those themes that shows up in almost every Kirby game since, pretty much. For good reason. It's just absolutely fantastic. This is a bit more of a tone difference compared to the 64 version, which is not like laid back, but it's a lot more the sky. That kind of thing. It's more airy. I don't know. All right. Let's talk about what I would consider to be the number two on there, though, because this is a song that has also shown up in several places, including Smash. It is Green Greens. This is Kirby. This is the Kirby. Granted, this is one of the ones where I feel like the main melodies, can I even call it an instrument? The tone that the main melody uses is a little bit weirdly grating.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that, other Kirby games would take and make better by giving them more realistic instruments as you go. And then you get Kirby's Epic Yarn, which gives it the recorder.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Still one of the funniest goddamn songs in this entire series. But again, this is where Green Greens originated. You can hear the song in,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. You can hear this song in Smash because there's an entire stage based off of Green Greens. Well, it's called Green Greens. I don't actually know how much I'd say it's based on Green Greens itself, but I mean, it's there. And this song comes with it. It's just, this is one of those quintessential Kirby songs. This is one you've heard. I know everybody has heard this song in some form or another. It's great.
Absolutely. But so here's where I thought, oh, maybe this originated in the Dreamland game because a lot of these fonts sound like they could come from Game Boy.
Potentially.
And that's where I feel like, yeah, when it's grading and it's like a lot of these you could hear and just imagine it on that handheld. And that's why it has some of the tones the way it does. It's very different compared to something like Butter Building. But yeah, a classic Kirby piece nonetheless for sure. Had to be here.
Yeah, another one that's been in basically every Kirby game in some form or another. I don't think it's in 64, weirdly enough. Which I'm actually surprised now that I'm thinking back on it. Huh. All right, final track on the Critical 5. This is Final Battle 2. Okay, are y'all ready for a spoiler for a game that came out when I was not even a year old? I was probably 5 months old? 3 months old. Oh god, I was only 3 months old when this game came out. That's distressing to know. Anyways, it turns out Dedede is not the villain of the story. Dedede took the Star Rod because an evil being known as Nightmare had corrupted the Fountain of Dreams, and he was actually saving everybody. And by putting the Star Rod back, Kirby unleashed Nightmare and therefore had to defeat him himself. This is the second phase of the Nightmare fight, which is just the regular boss fight where Kirby is given the Star Rod and you gotta shoot Nightmare. There's also a phase right before it where you're like flying through the air and trying to shoot Nightmare in this side-scrolling shoot 'em up, sort of. But also it's got a time limit because you are approaching the ground. You are falling at an angle. And if you don't beat him before you hit the ground, Kirby dies. So it's really, really ambitious for an NES game. But I think that the music for the second phase, even though the second phase isn't as interesting, is just way better. And sadly, I don't think this is a song that is used a whole lot in the series going forward, but I think it's still worth noting because it's really good.
Yeah, it is remarkable how they try to balance like this hype, intense sort of feeling to the final showdown, but yet it still has that like kind of positive Kirby energy to it. It's a neat blend, especially when you're kind of like, you've got that Star Rod, you've got that power, and you're doing what you can to overcome Nightmare. It's a really neat piece. I haven't heard it before, but it is very fitting here.
Yeah, and Nightmare is just Dracula. He just looks like Dracula. He's got the worst assist trophy in Smash. I hate the Nightmare assist trophy in Smash.
It is bad, yeah.
It's not just what it does is bad. It's really boring. For a character like Nightmare, he just shows up and it's like, haha, now the screen is black. Nintendog at least lets me look at a cute dog. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's get into tracks on the cutting room floor. I got two of them. The first one being Vegetable Valley 1. I feel like I heard this song a lot in like Newgrounds animations back in the day. Like a lot. This is another one of those very famous Kirby songs, though I don't know if I'd put it on the same rung as like Butter Building or Green Greens, but I feel like it's one of those sneaky ones that you've probably heard in something at some point.
It's just incredibly infectious. And yeah, again, I can't think of like if I've heard it before, but I feel like there's someone in my soul about like, what do you think Kirby music is? It's something like this. And there's something there about that.
Yeah, it's very Kirby. Whatever I have to say about how the game runs, the music and aesthetics fully understand what Kirby's all about.
Yes, crush it there for sure.
They nail it 100%, which you can also hear in my other track on the cutting room floor being Orange Ocean 2. This is a bit of a lower speed as compared to the other songs on the soundtrack, which I think really helps sort of separate it from the pack. I really just think that it's very pleasant to listen to. And when you think about it being an ocean that I can only assume is made of orange juice, why else would they call it that? Which sounds terrible, actually, now that I think about it. But would look very pretty, and I think this song reflects that well.
Not too many 8-bit tracks I can think of that are in 3/4 time, so shouts out to that. It's not totally waltzy. I'm trying to remember what our rules of 3/4 time are. But it has, a really nice calming feel to it.
So what will I never forget about Kirby's Adventure? Well, I mean, it's just a fun game. It's very cute. It has aesthetics just completely nailed down. It is probably one of the aesthetically strongest games the NES has. Just by far, which I guess is probably an advantage of being able to put this game together on a 10-year-old system that everybody's already figured out all the secrets to. But overall, I have no problem sitting down and replaying Kirby's Adventure for like 2 hours, kill a morning that way. I haven't done it since we played it for Smasterpieces, but I have a good time every time I do end up doing it. So I would recommend people give it a shot on the NSO NES app, because I think it is worthy of a look.
Yeah, you've convinced me to do it. I certainly didn't know it was so influential, and if it's that accessible, yeah, absolutely.
So, for our transition, we'd like to cover a fan remix, fan cover, things like that. I actually found one for a song that we didn't cover on the Critical 5 or Cutting Room Floor. It is the song Grape Garden. But I found an electronic jazz remix from the YouTube account Cadence Hira. So please enjoy that. Electronic jazz is good stuff, and it fits this song incredibly well. So I hope you all enjoy. Be right back.
We go from a pink puffball eldritch horror god that sucks up everything in his path to a town without anybody in it. Probably because of a pink eldritch horror god. Let's talk about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Interesting to talk about this game for sure. It was one that I wanted to bring to the show specifically to learn about the composer, and I had always heard really good things about the soundtrack. I wasn't able to find everything I wanted to, but we'll get to that in a second. So, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture released on October 11th, 2015 for PlayStation 4, and then on April 14th, 2016 for PC. It is developed by The Chinese Room and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. It is a first-person adventure game. It's commonly referred to, usually derisively, as a walking simulator. So think Gone Home, The Stanley Parable, these games where you walk around in a first-person perspective and interact with things around the world to uncover and progress more of the story. So in Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, the player can interact with floating lights throughout the world, most of which can reveal parts of the story through audio logs. The player can also interact with objects such as doors, radios, phones, fences, power switches, and more. So, how to describe the plot of Everybody's Gone to the Rapture? It's not easy. Different wiki articles had quite a struggle to do so it feels like this is the best I could kind of synthesize. The game takes place in 1984 in a fictional Shropshire village named Yaughton. The player's objective is to explore and try to discover how and why everyone in the village has disappeared. The main protagonists, Dr. Catherine or Kate Collins, and her husband, Stephen Appleton, are both scientists at an observatory, and they encounter a strange pattern of lights in the night sky, which they believe is an unknown form of life. They observe the pattern infecting and sometimes killing other life forms, such as birds and cows, before spreading to humans. Kate concludes that the pattern is attempting to communicate with humans, ignorant to the harm that is causing them. She locks herself in the observatory and spends the vast majority of the story attempting to communicate with it. During this time, Stephen becomes convinced that the pattern is a deadly threat capable of destroying the human race. Interesting in a time of pandemics and quarantines to look back on this game. Wow. Basically, it seems like the big questions that are trying to be asked, it's what is the pattern and what does it want? And what happened to everyone who lived in Yaughton? So, Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Everybody's Gone to the Rapture?
I have played Chinese Room's debut title, which I'm sure you will talk about in a bit, Dear Esther. But I've never played Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Dear Esther didn't really wow me back in the day. My roommate, he loves it. He loves Dear Esther. But I don't think even he played Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I'm pretty sure I own it. I think I got it for free from PlayStation Plus at one point. I've just never loaded it up to get to it. I've also never played the Amnesia game that Chinese Room made, though I actually hear that that game is not very good. So, I don't know. It's just a sense of apathy towards Chinese Room's output, if that makes sense. So I've not yet touched Everybody's Gone to the Rapture.
I meant to play this game because it's only like 4 to 5 hours long, and I own it. I actually bought it at the time because it was a time of like, you know, PS4 was like really looking for its own exclusives, and this was a PS4 exclusive in the first couple years of the console. Granted, Bloodborne, a more notable exclusive in 2015 for sure. But, you know, they were still struggling. I mean, it was like Uncharted 4 was like the first time in 2016 that was like, oh, finally like a huge big one, right? So I had purchased Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and I never got around to it. So I knew about this game, and it is gorgeous to look at and interact with and all. And the score is what everybody talks about with this game. And Jessica Curry and her amazing work. So I'm like, all right, I should probably play the game to learn about it. maybe be able to pick where these songs take place. Didn't get around to it. We're moving house, as you heard at the top of the show. It's an insane time, and I just did not have time to. So I unfortunately missed out on things like, I went through the soundtrack and picked what I think are the critical tracks and a couple on the cutting room floor. But there isn't a really vocal community out there, it seems, about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, where like fandom pages or YouTube comments or things like that. I could not get a sense on where these tracks played or even what context, because it's weird where you're a kind of a stranger walking through this world where everything's already happened. So you're encountering these evidence bits, these experiences, these audio logs that have already happened, and you're just kind of reimagining them, re-experiencing them in a way through these lights that kind of take humanoid shapes. And it's tough to necessarily pin down where these songs take place. So unfortunately, because of my lack of time, again, churning out these podcast episodes every week, I feel like that was an unfortunate side effect of this. But I really wanted to learn what the game was generally about, and especially the composer. So again, not too much development information out there about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, but it does start with the Chinese Room's first game, you're right, with Dear Esther. And during the development of Dear Esther, the team wanted to introduce interactive elements. And when this proved to be impractical at the time, the concept of Everybody's Gone to the Rapture was born. The developers were inspired by, quote, the very British apocalyptic sci-fi of the 60s and 70s, like John Christopher's The Death of Grass and Charles Eric Main's The Tide Went Out. I'm sure if you're familiar with those, you could maybe see some parallels. I am not familiar with these works. And this was a time where all of these different indie projects were getting Kickstarters or Indiegogos or things like that. And the team felt like they wouldn't be able to raise enough money for the project through crowdfunding sources or through sales of alpha versions. So they made the decision to partner with Sony. And with Sony's publishing money and their help, that's why it ended up as a PlayStation exclusive, at least for a little while before it ended up on PC. Everybody's Gone to the Rapture reviewed fairly well, with a Metacritic average of 78. The soundtrack is certainly the point of highest praise, along with gorgeous visuals and a beautifully heartbreaking story, as some reviewers said. Critics found that it didn't really drive interactive storytelling as a medium and the potential there forward, though. I mean, Her Story came out in 2015, and I feel like people point to that more as what you can do with interactive storytelling. But as far as this game, critics thought that they didn't really shift the tone of the game as it progressed, kind of kept it pretty one note. They ended up making the backstory more interesting than the game itself. And then when you compare it to other quote-unquote walking simulators like Gone Home and the Stanley Parable, it doesn't really hold up compared to those. But the music is a wow point in a year of amazing soundtracks, 2015, right? So GameSpot said about the music, quote, Rapture includes a soundtrack that perfectly augments the game's atmosphere of melancholy and futility. Rapture's ambience always sits you on the edge of sorrow, with the music never quite intruding in an obtrusive way, but pulling you in just close enough to dip your toes into the game world's melancholy. Its sounds make it hard for you to not feel like Shropshire itself, cold, alone, and utterly empty. A lonely, beautiful void. It must have not done all that well, because there doesn't seem to be any sales information out there, so it's not like Sony was bragging about this one. Although it was an awards darling in certain circles. It was nominated for 10 BAFTAs.
That's a lot of nominations. Holy crap.
I'm not sure if that's because it's the British Arts and Film and Television Awards, but 10 is, staggering for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and it won 3 of them for Best Audio, Best Music, and Best Performer. That would be Merle Dandridge. Yes, Merle Dandridge, famous voice of Alex from Half-Life and Marlene from The Last of Us. She is the Kate Collins character in this game. So she's like the first voice you hear. She's one of the main protagonists. That was like one of the things I knew about this game. It's like, oh, she's one of the main protagonists, one of the main voices you hear. Got it. The game was also nominated for 9 awards at the Gang Awards. So yeah, the Game Audio Network Guild Awards. The people who love and appreciate game music love this game. And it won for Best Original Soundtrack Album, Best Dialogue, Best Original Song Choral, and Best Original Song Pop. It was also nominated for Outstanding Achievement in Original Music Composition at the DICE Awards, though it lost that award to Ori and the Blind Forest. And there hasn't really been much of a legacy. Nobody talks about wanting a sequel to Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. The Chinese Room had its own, history kind of continue on. We'll talk about how they were bought by another company, and they most recently made Little Orpheus, which was also nominated for, big awards and all that, especially on the soundtrack front. We've definitely talked about Little Orpheus in our 2020 review roundup on one of the composer follow-up headline segments for sure.
Yeah, I remember it coming up as like it's the only game on the list I've never heard of, but unfortunately for it, Hades was in that category every time. So tough break.
That's true. But the music was composed by Jessica Curry. And I definitely wanted to learn more about Jessica Curry because she's a name that is up there as far as recent and prominent game composers. So Jessica Curry was born in 1973, and she is currently based out of Brighton, England. How did she start with music? Well, she started playing the piano when she was 4 because her brother was having lessons, and she just didn't want to miss out. While he gave up, it became a lifelong passion for her, and so she learned to play cello and played in orchestras and also sang in choirs. She earned a Bachelor of Arts with honors in English Literature and Language at University College London. She was kind of torn between studying that or music, and she said, just go with that. But then she obtained a postgraduate diploma in screen music at the National Film and Television School. So when Dan Pinchbeck was developing his 2008 experimental video game, Dear Esther, he turned to his wife, Jessica Curry. Dan is a writer and a game creator, and Jessica Curry a musician, a composer. And so he has this idea for a game, and so turns to his wife to write a score. Well, Jessica Curry had taken a 4-year break of writing music to raise their son. And so it was kind of this flood of music for her. And as a result of this, Curry became the co-founder of the Chinese Room game studio. Eventually, she left that role to be more of an independent composer for the studio, especially after its acquisition by Sumo Group in 2018, and her husband still leads the studio. Jessica Curry is also a notable British radio presenter about video game music. In January 2019, it was announced that Curry would present High Score, Classic FM series on video game music, and that was the first of its kind on UK radio. Emer Noon, by the way, the composer known for her work on recent Blizzard games, took over the reins of the show in 2019. At around this time, Curry started presenting Sound of Gaming on BBC Radio 3. And this is, again, a weekly series on video game music, which is actually still airing today, at least in podcast form, with host Louise Blaine.
Now, that's the one I know. I have not heard of High Score, but Sound of Gaming I had heard about multiple times over the past few years.
Yeah, and I feel like we mentioned it on the show before, but Jessica Curry started Sound of Gaming. So there you go. In late 2018, she's busy with other things besides video game music. She was commissioned by the Royal Shakespeare Company and Magic Leap to work on The 7 Ages of Man, a mind-bending, beautiful AR experience which was selected for Sundance Film Festival 2019 as part of their New Frontier program. As far as when her About page on her website seemed to be at least updated in late 2021, the line was in there that she is, quote, currently working on a new game soundtrack. So maybe we'll hear more work from Jessica Curry soon. As far as who she's inspired by, she says she's, quote, completely and unhealthily obsessed by the Cardiacs, Joni Mitchell, Radiohead, Philip Glass, Thomas Newman, Bach, Antony and the Johnsons, The No Twist, and John Tavener. On her Twitter bio, she says that she likes gin and swimming, often at the same time. And you can follow Jessica Curry on Twitter at Jessica Curry 2. So her discography, at least for game music, because she's done these different music and visual and audio experiences. But as far as video games go, she's composed music for Dear Esther, Korsakovia, which I think was a Half-Life 2 mod that the Chinese Room worked on. As you mentioned, Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, So Let Us Melt, which is a Google Daydream game. Yes, when Google was first starting to step and dip their toes into the VR space, and Little Orpheus. The historical development research for the soundtrack is interesting because not only is Jessica Curry the composer for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, she's also the game director. She is the creative force behind it, and I think her husband did some writing on it as well, but like as far as who's got the title director, it's Jessica Curry. She describes her work on Everybody's Gone to the Rapture as, quote, the first time I would say that I wrote a truly interactive score. Because the music that she ended up writing for Dear Esther, she thought it was kind of more like shoehorned in. Like she wrote all this music that really fit the tone and it worked nicely, but it would play like once at certain moments and it wouldn't really loop and it wouldn't be all that interactive. When it came to Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, she thought it was more like her first journey into interactivity. But with Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, it was like the first time that it was really intended to be interactive. And it makes sense with the game world. Before the game came out, she noted how, quote, it's going to be the largest ensemble I've worked with for a long time. The music for this is really coming together at the moment, and I'm hoping that it's going to be my best work yet. And it certainly took her career to the next level. She had some interesting thoughts on like what were the inspirations behind this soundtrack. So she says, quote, the score is absolutely promoting the idea of the Anglican choral tradition. If you grew up in an English village, even if you're not religious, as Dan and I aren't, but we both grew up in small villages, the church is so integral to village life. It just permeates everything. I wanted the music to reflect the fact that we have Father Jeremy in the game, and the church is so central in that world. I didn't want to support the action because so little goes on, but I wanted to create the ghost of a world. The world is already over when you start the game, so I couldn't score this world. The music is so nostalgic, hearkening back to this idea of a golden age of Britain that never actually existed. What I wanted to capture with Rapture is that sense of nostalgia for a world that is already gone. The player has that feeling of loss and melancholy as they're playing.
I mean, this already kind of sounds down my alley.
Yeah, and it's totally different than I think anything I've ever heard in a game soundtrack, much less anything we've brought to the show, which makes me very excited to bring up the 5 critical tracks that I selected for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And we start with this track here. This is Finding the Pattern. So this isn't the first piece you hear in the game, but I feel like this piece overall, this track on the 28-track soundtrack, has a great amount of range to it. You don't hear it in the clip here, but the piece actually opens with this Anglican choir singing, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me?" And it establishes that sort of church-backed feeling, especially when you're talking about the Rapture and ideas like that, and you have the church being such a strong presence. There's a lot of hymnal tunes and, taking lyrics from what could be psalms in here, and it really sets a fascinating tone. But just this sublime orchestration here that you hear in the clip. At the end, you kind of get like these synth plays here. And I think that's super neat. You don't hear it too often, but I kind of get the impression that that's almost more like when you're talking about finding the pattern, finding this light pattern that is so mysterious and that maybe represents that as something that's otherworldly. I think it's just an interesting collection of music, sounds, and feels and emotions through this whole piece, that it's one that is tough just to pick a little sample here, but just a really good example of the breadth of amazing music that Curry composes here.
It's a really, really interesting combination of a bunch of things. The orchestrated part kind of reminds me of Journey more than anything. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's just recency stuff because I listened to Journey's soundtrack very recently.
It's interesting that you note that because this and Dear Esther, both scores that Austin Wintory has like the highest praises for.
Oh, I can see why. This also kind of reminds me of some stuff you'd hear in like Assassin's Creed is where I want to take it. The synths sort of bring that part in a little bit. Yeah, no, this is really cool and overall very unique.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. But then we get to more of the vocal representation that you'll hear throughout the soundtrack. And that continues in number 2 on the Critical 5. This is The Morning Tree. This is a gorgeous vocal piece here. And would you have guessed that this is the Gang Award winner for Best Original Song, Pop? I don't know if I'd categorize it as pop, but it seems to be a prominent piece from the game. Again, it kills me not to know where it played. I wish I had the time to play this game, but the production of podcasts continues on, and moving house is difficult during all of that. So The Morning Tree, a prominent piece seemingly from this game, a lot of love for this track. And especially important to note, the featured soprano vocalist on this whole soundtrack, that'd be Elin Manahan Thomas. And her vocals, especially on some of the other tracks where she gets to that upper soprano register, is just incredible. Curry noted that, working with her and hearing her performance kind of just really set the tone and the pace and like had everything fall into place. Like that's like the focal point for everything that is really driven all together on this soundtrack for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. So yeah, I feel like this is an important one to include here. Had to bring it.
I agree that I'm not entirely sure why this would be in a pop category, because this is not a pop song.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. This vocalist is crazy talented. And I wonder if she's in any other games. That might be something to look into in the future.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. That could be something to look into, because I feel like it's a similar prominence to Amy Evans, and how she has a distinct voice and she's been used prominently in video games. I wonder if Elin Manahan Thomas has done any similar work. Number 3 on the Critical 5 tracks for Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is Carry Me Back to Her Arms. I would not have guessed that Everybody's Gone to the Rapture would have had a soundtrack that was so inspired by church music, by this Anglican choir. But, you know, it totally nails it. Jessica Curry just does an amazing job with arranging all of this, and the harmonies here, especially for a male choir on this track. Just absolutely gorgeous. When that extra layer of male vocals comes in and just really fills out the sound, it's unique enough to hear just men singing at this point in the soundtrack especially, but to do it so well, it's just so good. This is another example of, I wish that, whether it's in comments or just available on the internet in general, people were better about like pointing out, where does this take place? Because so many of the comments on different tracks on YouTube are just like, oh, this is so beautiful, one of the most beautiful pieces, but also so sad. The game's so sad. And on this one, it just says, Frank. And I'm like, who's Frank? What happens?
Frank. You don't know Frank?
Clearly, Frank must be a character in this game, and this plays to represent his fate with the pattern. I'm guessing. I have no idea, but it was like, just like, oh, Frank. And then someone's like, oh, yeah. And it's like, what about Frank? So I'm guessing this has to do with a male character called Frank.
Frank, no. This is the most churchy of them. Like, the first track had the intro that is pretty church like, but this is the most 100%. I feel like I would hear this in some of the churches I've been dragged to throughout my life. I know that she mentioned, and you mentioned that, like, it's mostly because even if you're not religious, like, the church is a central figure in small, like, English towns and stuff like that. It's still very interesting to hear, like, somebody that is not religious doing music like this and just sort of nailing it. I think that, more than anything, really shows just how central that establishment is for places like where this game takes place.
And how talented Jessica Curry is, that she can capture that essence and portray it in such a convincing way that you don't really ever hear in video game music, but it's done to such great effect. That continues in the number 4 track here on the Critical 5, and this is The End of All Things. There is a sense of finality with this track, not only when you title your piece The End of All Things, but also its position on the soundtrack. It's like track 26 out of 28, so I'm going to guess it has a prominent place pretty close to the end of the game when you start to kind of piece everything together. This track really stood out to me, again, because just the really impressive work. Here's the soprano range of Elin Manahan Thomas. And it's just incredible. Oh my gosh. Then you get the supporting choir that comes in, and it's just a totally different texture than the previous track with the all-male choir. But it's just beautiful and haunting. And then you get the full drop with the instruments, and then the baritone and the bass voices coming in. It's just the full sound here. Again, gives you a sense like, things are coming together. You're piecing everything together. It has that finality to it. Just special and beautiful. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah, it's really, really cool to hear just the constant building throughout the whole thing. You mentioned when the supporting male choir starts coming in and getting louder and bigger, and the presence is more exaggerated. And it's just really, really neat. And I wonder if this is like the ending sequence or something.
Very well, maybe, yeah.
It sounds like it could be, and if it's not, it sounds like it should be.
I'm going to just give the benefit of the doubt to Jessica Curry and say it is. Again, I'm sorry. I wish I knew. We're going to wrap up the Critical 5, though, with another very important piece to the soundtrack, and this is The Light We Cast. The other clips have had at least other instruments present when we've had vocals there as well. But this is an entire piece that is just vocals. And it's incredible. I actually know where it's played. It is the credits theme.
There you go.
We got one.
Got one, baby.
But this was also that Gang Award winner for Best Original Song, Choral. And yeah, can it just win like that award every year? Oh my goodness. Like literally only driven by the strength of these voice performances. And wow, it's so good. And I feel like you're just dipping. If there were dipping the toes in the melancholy for some of those other tracks, this is the full body plunge into it.
Yeah, this one was nominated for a fitting category, unlike the soundtrack. But yeah, it being entirely a cappella is super gorgeous. And as somebody whose mother was in an a cappella choir for like 4 years, a cappella's hard.
Oh, yeah.
Like really hard, especially to make this full sound that this has, that mostly carries through the last track as well. It's really, really neat. They must have gotten a hell of a talented choir to sort of back up this game's soundtrack.
So it looks like the credits on the soundtrack credit the choir to Metro Voices and London Voices. And Dan Pinchbeck, Jessica Curry's husband, wrote the lyrics to the music. So a team effort there. But yeah, just amazing work here. And I feel like this is one of the more well-known pieces from the game. But wow, I can see why. That's incredible talent on display. Got a couple tracks on the cutting room floor that I really liked. Again, I couldn't tell you where they play. I'm sorry. But they stood out to me and I wanted to pass them on to you, the listener. So the first of these is An Early Harvest. So this is another one where it's a long piece and there's a lot of orchestration going on here. Not as many vocals present in this one, but the swell here and just the powerful full orchestration just really prominent and on display here. Also a title, An Early Harvest, that in a game about making ties to the Rapture, a bit of an eerie title there, but yeah, wow, I can only imagine the moment this plays here. And yeah, fitting, I'm sure, and just causing a tear to stir in some people.
This feels like the music that would play during like an open world game. That the Breath of the Wild shot where you're running up onto the hill and looking over the whole map.
The big landscape hit, yeah.
Yeah, that's what this gives me vibes of. It's pretty good.
Absolutely. And a game with just, gorgeous visuals. When the world is like telling the story, you gotta have like a beautiful environment.
Mm-hmm.
The other track I have on the cutting room floor is Aurora. a really subdued piece here. And I love the piano backing on this one. Joe, I know you would too, especially the beginning of the piece, not the clip necessarily, but it's like this piano that is just gorgeous. Has a couple moments of like minor to major key shifts that are really powerful, but yeah, this one here, you got the vocals back in play and they're just nice and quiet, and the harmonies here that are at play just really gave it this nice, sad texture. But wow, I feel like it's a good kind of round out of just an amazing soundtrack that I wish I had a lot more context and in-game placement for.
Yeah, this song is absolutely gorgeous. The beginning, like you mentioned, I also, is that an oboe or a clarinet? What is that instrument at the beginning? It's a woodwind. I know that for a fact, but it's very, very beautiful. There's part in the song where the vocals come in, and I assume that's Miss Thomas again. I think this might actually be my favorite on the list. It's very, very good.
Yeah, listening to the beginning of the piece outside the clip, it sounds like that's a clarinet. So
yeah,
again, just great orchestration overall. Just you get flutes in here as well, not in this piece, but throughout the soundtrack. Man, this soundtrack is so good, and that's what I'll never forget about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Again, a game I need to play, and I feel like now listening to the music and learning about the soundtrack and learning about Jessica Curry, I now need to find time. I need to find the 4 to 5 hours to sit down with this game that I do own on PlayStation 4. I just need to get to it, and maybe I can eventually report back to like, I found out where some of these play. Maybe I'll learn what is with Frank and why everyone is so morose and melancholy about it. But just wow. One of these things where when you bring a game to the show like we do and you don't know much about it, but you've heard great things about it, and it's going in with the intent to learn, and you just want to learn even more than you already have.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to do that, because I have a habit of, if I want to play a game and I know it's got a pretty good soundtrack, I will put it on one of the scheduled future episodes to be like, all right, idiot, now you have to play it. Go. But sometimes you don't have time to do that. And I'm always nervous bringing up games that I genuinely don't know anything about.
Same.
But I think you did a great job. I think it was very informative, and it has me interested in trying out this game, but who knows if I'm going to install it on my PS4 before I move, when Elden Ring is still sitting inside of that console and hasn't been loaded up yet, but we'll see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if Jessica Curry happens to be tuning in, especially with her broadcasting background, I hope I did her work justice. I got to play the game though. I'm sorry. That's on me. That's on moving and everything. We're both in a crazy time here. And so when we're piecing together games that have apostrophe S in them, that's an interesting theme, but also just the big overarching force that is Kirby and the pattern that brings everybody to the Rapture. That's also a pretty decent tie of these games together with Kirby's Adventure and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes there, but we also have a Spotify playlist, where if we cover a track from a video game on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to this monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Kirby's Adventure obviously is not on Spotify, being a first-party Nintendo published game. Rest in peace. But Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is on Spotify, so those will be making their way onto the playlist soon.
That's excellent. They really deserve to be there. Absolutely. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Suggestions for games to cover in the future. We'd like to hear that from you. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Boy, next week is going to be a thing. I will be talking about Kengo Hagiwara.
It's getting to be that time of the year, isn't it? I will be talking about Donald Griffin.
What a weird pair of games.
I'm pretty hyped. But to play us out, let's talk about a cover or a fan remix of a song from Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. There were a couple fan remixes floating around out there for a couple songs there. But then I found one of The Morning Tree by YouTuber Field of Reeds. And if you're an avid listener of the show, you might know that Field of Reeds is the YouTube channel for Kristen Nygus.
Yeah.
The woodwind player that has been featured on many games that we've talked about before, but we highlighted her work on the Ori and the Will of the Wisps episode. And so Kristen Nygus did a cover of The Morning Tree. I feel like that's an interesting cross collision of worlds there in the video game music space. So please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.